The night was heavy with rain, the kind that seemed to wash color out of the streets until everything looked gray and tired. Neon signs flickered across broken sidewalks, buzzing faintly as though they too were struggling to hold on. At the corner of Maple and 3rd sat a diner with a chipped facade and a sign that once promised hot meals, cold drinks, warm hearts. Now, half the bulbs had burned out, and the glow above the door was more ghostly than inviting. But inside, Jeremiah Cole kept the lights on. Jeremiah wasn't just another man running a business. He was a man fighting a battle no one else could see. His diner had once been alive with chatter, the scrape of forks on plates, the smell of bacon sizzling on the griddle. Now the booth sat empty more often than not. The coffee machine groaned like an old dog, and the register had seen more dust than dollar bills. Every bill he tucked into his office drawer grew heavier, as though paper itself had learned how to press down on his chest. Still, no one ever left hungry. Jeremiah believed food was more than sustenance. It was dignity. When a stranger walked in, shivering from the cold, he would pour coffee before asking a single question. When a single mother came with her children, he'd find a way to make pancakes appear even if his flour was running low. Some said it was foolish. Others said it was noble. But Jeremiah never explained himself. He just cooked, served, and gave. That night, as the storm raged, he found himself staring at the empty diner, rag in hand, polishing the counter he'd already wiped 100 times. Outside, the rain fell harder, rattling the windows like impatient fingers. He sighed, rubbing his temples, wondering how much longer he could keep the doors open. Then the bell above the entrance chimed softly. A figure stepped inside, drenched to the bone, coat clinging to his thin frame. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembling as though the cold had settled deep into his bones. Jeremiah's gaze settled on the man, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The stranger's shoes squelched with every step, water pooling beneath them as if the storm itself had followed him inside. His beard was patchy, streaked with gray, and his eyes, though dimmed by exhaustion, held a weight that made Jeremiah's chest tighten. Without hesitation, Jeremiah gestured to the booth nearest the counter. "Sit down, brother," he said gently, his voice carrying the warmth the rain outside could never wash away. "You're freezing." The man shuffled forward, silent, his shoulders hunched as if life had pressed too many burdens onto his frame. Jeremiah didn't ask questions. He simply moved with purpose. A steaming mug of coffee slid across the table. Then came a bowl of chicken soup, rich with whatever scraps Jeremiah had left in the kitchen. He even placed 2 painkillers beside the napkin, a quiet acknowledgement of aches that couldn't be spoken aloud. From the far corner, a pair of locals whispered, their words sharp enough to cut through the sound of the storm. "See, that's why he's broke," one muttered, giving food away to every stray that walks in. The other chuckled, "He'll lose this place before winter's out." Jeremiah heard them, of course. He always did. Their voices were like stones thrown at glass, meant to shatter something fragile inside him. But instead of turning, instead of defending himself, Jeremiah focused on the man in front of him. He watched as trembling hands wrapped around the mug, as color slowly returned to a face that looked like it hadn't seen kindness in years. The stranger ate quietly, but his eyes never left Jeremiah. There was something intent in his gaze, something that studied more than the food on the table. It was as though he was measuring the man who stood behind the counter, trying to understand what kind of person gave without asking, gave without knowing if there was anything left for himself. Outside, the rain hammered. Morning broke with a pale, reluctant light that pushed its way through the fogged windows of Jeremiah's diner. The storm had passed, but the air outside was still damp, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt. Inside, the diner was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of a spoon in a coffee cup. A few regulars sat scattered at the booths, their voices carrying more judgment than conversation. "Poor man's too soft," one of them muttered, stirring sugar into his cup with deliberate slowness. "Soft?" the other scoffed, leaning back with a smirk. "It's stupidity. You don't give away food when you can't even pay rent." Their chuckles were low, but they cut sharper than laughter had any right to. Jeremiah moved behind the counter, shoulders squared, face unreadable. He refilled salt shakers, straightened napkin holders, and busied his hands with meaningless tasks. It was easier than responding. Words, after all, never paid bills. By mid-afternoon, the bell over the door chimed again. Jeremiah glanced up, and there he was, the same man from the night before. Same ragged coat, same quiet steps, though his eyes seemed a little brighter, as if warmth had returned to him in fragments. Without a word, Jeremiah nodded toward a booth and slid a plate of eggs and toast onto the table. "You again," Jeremiah said softly, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Eat. No arguments." The man didn't speak much. He rarely did, but his eyes never stopped watching Jeremiah. They followed him as he moved between tables, as he wiped down the counter, as he checked the old clock above the door, like time itself was an enemy he couldn't outrun. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than Jeremiah could keep up with. His generosity wasn't seen as noble anymore. It was seen as weakness. Suppliers stopped extending credit. One delivery truck simply never showed. When Jeremiah called, the voice on the other end was curt. "Pay what you owe first." The walls. That evening, Jeremiah stepped outside with a trash bag in hand. The air was sharp with the scent of rain-soaked pavement, and the street lamps glowed weakly, halos spreading across puddles that lined the curb. As he approached the dumpster, two neighbors leaned against a lamppost, their voices carrying easily in the quiet street. "Man's drowning himself," one muttered, arms folded as though the verdict were final. "Don't feel sorry for him," the other replied, shaking his head. "He chose this life. You can't feed everyone." Jeremiah froze for a moment, the bag hanging heavy at his side. Their words echoed louder than they should have, bouncing around inside his chest. For a flicker of a moment, he wondered if they were right. Was he sinking himself by holding others afloat? The thought clawed at him, unwelcome but persistent. But then he pictured the faces, the tired mother who walked in with two hungry children, the old man with hands calloused by years of forgotten labor, the kids who laughed through mouths full of pancakes as though joy itself had been hidden inside the batter. And, most recently, the stranger who ate in silence but with eyes that spoke volumes. The doubt passed like a shadow, brief but biting. Jeremiah tossed the trash, squared his shoulders, and walked back inside. The diner's lights buzzed faintly overhead. The booths still sat mostly empty, crumbs scattered like ghosts of meals past. Jeremiah leaned against the counter, exhaustion etched deep into the lines of his face. He rubbed his temples, trying to quiet the noise of unpaid bills and whispered judgment. Across the room, the silent stranger watched. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, as if he recognized something rare in Jeremiah's weariness, a kind of quiet resilience that no debt collector or sneering neighbor could erase. Outside, the world judged. Inside, Jeremiah kept showing up, day after day, with the same steady heart. And each evening, the stranger returned too, always silent, always watching, as though waiting for the story to reveal its purpose. The weeks stretched on like a rope about to snap. Each day, Jeremiah rose before dawn, his body aching, but his hands steady as he lit the old grill and brewed the first pot of coffee. The smell of onions, bacon, and burnt toast tried its best to mask the scent of desperation that lingered in the air. Customers came in fewer numbers now, and those who did seemed more interested in gossip than meals. By Tuesday, the pantry was nearly bare. Jeremiah pieced together meals from whatever scraps remained. A half bag of rice, 3 bruised tomatoes bought cheap from a sympathetic vendor, a few onions that had already started to soften at the edges. He stirred them in his soup with a heavy hand, hiding the tightness in his chest every time he thought about the ledger tucked away in his office drawer. Suppliers were done with him. Promises of payment meant nothing when weeks turned into months. One by one, they cut him off. "Business is business," they said, though the sting of those words lingered long after the phone clicked dead. The stranger kept returning, always at the same booth, always silent except for the scrape of a spoon against a chipped bowl or the soft lift of a coffee cup. And Jeremiah kept serving him. Eggs, toast, soup. Whatever scraps he could manage found their way to the man's table without hesitation. Some nights, when exhaustion sat too heavily on his shoulders, Jeremiah wondered aloud in the empty diner. How much longer can I keep this going? His voice carried only to the hum of the refrigerator, yet the stranger's eyes always seemed to answer. Calm, watchful, almost reassuring in their silence. Neighbors passed by the windows, glancing in with pity or disdain, whispering to one another about how foolish it was to pour kindness into a world that gave so little in return. But Jeremiah didn't stop. His hands kept cooking, his heart kept giving, and his diner, fragile as it was, remained a place where hunger met compassion, even as the walls threatened to. Thursday morning brought no comfort. The sun struggled to break through thick clouds, casting the diner in a dull gray light that made everything inside look older, more fragile. Jeremiah unlocked the door, his hand lingering on the worn handle as though he needed to summon courage just to turn it. The mail lay scattered on the counter, envelopes piled in the stack he had avoided all week. But one stood out, thicker than the rest, stamped in bold red letters. His heart sank before his fingers even touched it. He knew. He had always known. With trembling hands, he tore it open. The words inside confirmed his dread: foreclosure. Unless the debt was paid in full, the diner would be seized within days. The paper blurred as his eyes burned, but he refused to let tears fall. He folded the notice, slid it into the drawer, and shut it firmly. Out of sight, but not out of mind. That evening, the diner was quieter than ever. Only the stranger sat in his usual booth, eating slowly, each bite deliberate, as though he savored every grain of rice Jeremiah had scraped together. Jeremiah watched him from behind the counter, exhaustion weighing heavier than the plates he carried. For the first time, Jeremiah slid into the booth across from him. The stranger looked up, surprise flickering across his face, though he said nothing. They sat in silence, the clink of the spoon against the bowl the only sound between them. Jeremiah rubbed his hands together, searching for words but finding none. He wanted to ask who this man was, why he came every day, what he was looking for in his silence. But instead, he simply said, "Eat." That's all that matters right now. The stranger's eyes softened, as if those words revealed more about Jeremiah than any explanation could. He nodded once, slowly, and returned to his meal. Outside, the street grew darker, shadows stretching long across the pavement. Inside, two weary men sat across from each other, bound by an unspoken connection, neither of them. Friday morning came with a chill that crept beneath the door and lingered in the diner's corners. Jeremiah moved slowly, his joints stiff from nights of little sleep. The notice of foreclosure weighed heavy in his pocket like a stone, though he hadn't spoken a word of it to anyone. Instead, he did what he always did: lit the grill, brewed the coffee, and opened his doors to a neighborhood that seemed to believe more in his failure than his survival. By late morning, a few customers trickled in. They spoke in hushed tones that weren't nearly quiet enough, their words pricking Jeremiah's ears as he wiped down the counter. Told you he couldn't last. All that free food finally caught up to him. Kindness doesn't pay the bills. He clenched his jaw, but said nothing. To argue was to waste breath. To serve was to keep breathing. The stranger arrived again, stepping through the doorway with the same quiet presence. Coat still ragged, beard still unkempt. He slid into his booth as though it belonged to him now, and Jeremiah placed a plate of pancakes in front of him before he even asked. The man nodded in gratitude, his eyes holding that same searching weight. This time, though, Jeremiah lingered. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching as the man ate. "You come here every day," he said finally, his voice low, cautious. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" The stranger paused, fork halfway to his mouth. For a moment, Jeremiah thought he might answer. But instead, the man simply lowered his eyes, took another bite, and chewed in silence. Jeremiah sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Doesn't matter. As long as you're hungry, You'll have a plate here." The stranger looked up at that, something flickering in his gaze, a spark of recognition, or perhaps respect. He gave the faintest nod before returning to his meal. Outside, the cold wind rattled the diner's windows. Inside, Jeremiah's words lingered in the air like a vow he couldn't break, even.